Hi, everybody. I am Bruce Whitfield. I'm going to be facilitating a discussion all about logistics real estate this afternoon, certainly this afternoon, South Africa time. Welcome to wherever you are tuned in from this afternoon. We've got a great panel lined up for you and an opportunity for you to ask questions in the way we're all used to now in our lovely new world of the bar on the side. You can ask your questions and we'll get through to those as quickly as we can. The next 20 minutes, 25 minutes or so, top-notch panel for you. We've got Robert Dabrowski. Now, Robert is the Chief Executive of Panattoni Europe, biggest developers in logistics real estate in Europe. We've got Stephen Brown, who's Chief Executive of Fortress Real Estate. We've got Mike Stopforth, who is the founder of Beyond Binary, and he interrogates people all the time about the evolving world of business and e-commerce. And then Phil Moret, the head for Africa and Brazil supply chain. On. Let's go around the table quickly, our virtual table this afternoon, and let us talk to, I think, Steve Brown first. Steve, you kick off, if you would, in terms of logistics real estate. Just give us a 30-second scene, if you would.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah, I think we've seen a huge change, especially driven by this pandemic. I think it's accelerated everything. We've got a couple of other portfolios. We've got some rural retail, and what we've seen during this crisis is the resilience of it, and we're still fielding a lot of inquiries actually to fill that space. I mean, the vacancies are sitting in the low single digits, so I think it's something that's really on the radar. It's been on our radar for a while, and I think it's picking up a lot of momentum in South Africa as well as globally.
Great, let's go and get a global picture then. Robert Dabrowski, your 30 seconds start now.
Yes, obviously, I mean, we all knew that e-commerce is going to drive our business going forward for quite some time, but obviously pandemic has accelerated the processes. And I mean, this year, despite COVID, our business is doing better in terms of new demand for space and new development starts. So it is a better year than last year, despite COVID. So despite all the challenges to execute, we still experience a better time than before COVID.
It's nice to hear people with good stories to tell. Phil Moret, I hope you can build on that.
Absolutely. Hey, Bruce, and hello to everyone at home or in their home office, working remotely. We have had to deal with this new normal, and that's quite a boring word now, but how we best help our customers out with what they want to shop, where they want to shop, how they want to shop. And that's been a nice change for us to deal with. And given everything else that's going on in the world, to have the problems that we have at the moment in terms of increasing order volumes, and whilst dealing with a softer bricks and mortar rate, still being able to keep customers happy and buying what they would like to be buying.
Thanks, Phil. I wonder when, it's a bit like saying to people, Happy New Year. At what point do you stop saying to people, Happy New Year? Do you do that on the 3rd of January, the 7th of January, the 15th of January, or do you keep on doing it awkwardly for the whole of January? When do we stop calling the new normal just normal? Because now it is normal. Anyway, we'll work that one out on another day. Mike Stopforth, your 30 seconds.
Yeah, Bruce, I mean, we know running businesses that change is an inevitability, but what's remarkable at the moment is just the rate of change that we're being subjected to. And I think what's so interesting is to examine which organizations and specifically which retailers were well positioned to take advantage of the changing landscape and yet really struggled to, and why. And then similarly, which retailers probably should have been poorly affected or even decimated by this experience and have adapted really well. And there's characteristics shared by those organizations which are really interesting to unpack. I hope we'll speak about those during the course of today.
Your instruction is my command. I've got that. Thank you. I've got that very much. Robert, let's kick off with you. Earlier on, Stephen was alluding to Europe and how you guys are world leaders. Just give me a sense of the changes you've had to do, how you've had to adapt your future plan.
Yeah, it's obviously in Europe, I mean, the e-commerce is pretty active for quite some time. And I mean, our business to serve customers we were always trying to respond to the needs, but this rapid demand push that we had over the last several months was obviously something we haven't seen before. And at the same time, people were in the lockdown, so execution was obviously harder, and the financial world was a bit in chaos. So it was a quite challenging time, but it was clear that this is the kind of a transitional period for us as a business, and that we are at the beginning of a big change that will stay here. So all our European offices were trying to respond to the obviously short-term demand initially, then we were obviously under the push of big e-commerce players to place new developments to cope with what they see on the ground, and how quickly they have to readjust to the new world. So being a development company, I mean, it's not easy to adjust with the development volumes quite quickly, but this is what we feel is going to be kind of a theme going forward in all the European markets. When there is a consumption, you have to build new kind of a retail from scratch. So we feel like Western Europe and Europe generally, even if it's pretty matured development-wise, it was matured, but it's not anymore, because obviously you need to build a new supply chain and retail from scratch. And we are at the beginning of building out European retail once again. So this is obviously quite exciting, quite challenging, but I mean, feels like there's we're at the beginning of this story, and we need to kind of learn how to quickly adjust to the new volumes, and this is also the moment where investor world, banking world needs to kind of readjust too, and see how the change is coming, and support kind of a new wave of business, which is obviously rather on the e-commerce side than traditional retail. The same with our clients, which some of them are pure e-commerce, some of them are mixed, and some of them are just traditional retailers. So obviously different level of problems each of them is having, but we are serving, for instance, one big US giant right now in Europe, and obviously we can't serve them fast enough right now, and they're just focused on e-commerce, and we are starting to be afraid that we will be just working for them, because they are expanding so quick.
How are you making decisions in a time of such enormous change? How are you making decisions on building new sites, acquiring new sites, creating new infrastructure in an environment that Mike says is changing fast and is likely to keep on changing faster and faster until we get to whatever the new normal is?
Obviously, we listen to our customers, and we follow them. At the same time, while you follow them on a build-to-suit basis, on a kind of a tailor-made kind of a solution basis, you learn where they want to be. And obviously, on top of it, you build other facilities that could serve other customers. So you learn with the e-commerce giants how they look at the world, and you try to kind of serve them and others potentially if they come, but obviously you follow the customer. That's the only way you can learn where to build, and clearly it's where the consumption is. But at the same time, with consumption, you need to have availability of labor, which for e-commerce businesses, obviously, e-commerce facilities are much more kind of labor-intensive facilities. So you need to meet these two worlds. And sometimes you have a large consumer base, but not a lot of labor. So in Europe, obviously, Europe is obviously a lot of countries, but you have to look through the borders, where you locate yourself close to the customer base, consumer base, but also where there is labor. So you have, for instance, Germany, Poland, and German-Polish border, where you have consumer base in Germany and labor in Poland. So this border is pretty attractive, obviously. The same you have between Spain and France. You have obviously quite good labor on the Spanish side, and obviously high consumption on the French side. So this is also interesting border. So you have to look through the borders a bit in Europe, rather than than countries. But yeah, I mean, you mainly follow the customer, and this is how you learn. And I'm not inventing it. I'm just following the customers.
That's great. Thank you, Robert, very much indeed. Stephen Brown, to you, I mean, where Robert's got those enormous opportunities and those cross-border opportunities and the huge challenges and excitement that brings, in South Africa, we've got a far more staid e-commerce market. But what we have seen, and every e-retailer that I've been speaking to over the last couple of months has been telling me that they sort of are where they thought they'd be in 2025, 26, and it happened really quickly, and they are massively playing catch up. I mean, have you been able to benefit from this rapid change that has happened even domestically?
Yeah, Bruce, I think, there are long lead times to roll out these physical products. And I think the one thing that we saw, as Robert alluded to, is suddenly, during the pandemic and the crisis and the hard lockdown, we saw a massive demand for overflow space. We actually signed 3 interesting deals in the middle of lockdown, which was one to a Netflix production company, one to Takealot, and then we sold some land to a data center, which, I think I don't need to say anymore. It kind of describes what exactly was going on in the economy. But I think it does take a long time for especially the retailers, I mean, Phil's on the line like Cotton On, to actually make that transition and to really get their plans in place. And as Robert correctly said, we aren't inventing e-commerce. We are just providing some of the infrastructure. So we are a bit of a follower. We have seen demand pick up as people, started to emerge from their house arrest and started to actually get back to business. I think we've seen demand certainly pick up on our inquiries. Our vacancies are in the low single digits in the logistics space. So there's definitely a lot of interest. And I think in SA, we see globally and in Europe, driven by the likes of Amazon. In SA, I think that we're seeing a lot of interest from the traditional retailers who have potentially been slightly underinvested in e-commerce. And I think, they still have very strong businesses, very local connections. So I think that we're seeing a lot more demand from actually the shift from online bricks and mortar into e-commerce as opposed to solely e-commerce players.
South Africa is a very different market. I mean, we are kind of more rats and we are addicted to our ways of operating. It's going to take us possibly a lot longer to break out of those traditions. Even with COVID, people, have been trapped in their houses and in small spaces for an awfully long time, use it as an excuse to get out. Do you see this, though, as a fundamental shifting point? I'm not going to use the word pivot, but is this the pivot point for South Africa? Is this the thing that e-commerce needed? Was this the crisis that is actually going to be the catalyst of a fundamental shift, in your opinion, of the way in which we do business?
I genuinely do think so. I think it is going to change the way we do business fundamentally. As we've seen with traditional retail, and we still have quite a lot of people are creatures of habit. And, so I think that the retail will exist, but especially in South Africa with a much younger population, I think that, we're going to see them far more open to adopting the change. And I think that we're almost going to see a retread of the old retail habits where the younger population in 5 or 10 years' time is going to be far more tech savvy and far more open to the omni-channel, and where they interact with the brand is in many places, and where they execute that transaction is in many places. So I think we're definitely going to see a fundamental shift. But at the same time, I think, we need a place to be and to socialize. So the traditional bricks and mortar retail, I don't think is going to go away at all. I think all of us are tired of being locked down in our houses and we can't wait to actually get out for a while. Even if that's to a mall or a shopping center for a little bit. But I definitely think that the scale has suddenly been reached almost overnight. And I think that that's going to be here to stay.
I mean, I've never been a fan of the shopping mall myself, but I had to venture into one the other day, and it was just like I've arrived in some kind of cathedral of freedom and joy and choice and happiness again. But yes, it didn't last long. On to you, Phil Murray. I mean, Cotton On's roots are in Australia, and we're not going to hold that against not immediately anyway. But the logistics of running global distribution from Australia, where supply chains have been broken, and stretched and challenged. I mean, Chinese supply chains did break for a bit, and I think things have opened up quite nicely. Just paint a picture for me.
Yeah, it was interesting for us. So we were lucky or unlucky in the sense to get the later end of that curve of COVID. So we had a couple of markets in our portfolio that had sort of dealt with already the first wave. So the countries in the east, so Singapore, Hong Kong, had already felt the wave of what COVID could do and malls being shut down. So we sort of had a version of a blueprint that we were able to execute and then control the flow of stock, then knowing that we would be, everything would close down for a period of time. You could never tell how far it was or what the effect would be. But we were lucky in the sense that we didn't have the gluts of stock that we couldn't stop, which I think a lot of retailers have definitely felt. If you go around malls now and look at the product that's being sold, I don't think I can have another jumper, right? Or another fleece or another big jacket. And a lot of people have had to be dealing with that, and you deal with it, and there's certain methods to get out of it. Luckily, we haven't felt the huge effects of that, and because again we'd had some test cases overseas, we were then able to prep ourselves as well as we could with that really short notice. So 23rd of March or whatever it was, and we had a month to sort of prepare for it almost. We knew it was on the horizon. We didn't know the scale of it, and that enabled us to be in a good position when level 5 eased a little bit, which made our transition into this period. Like Mike said earlier, there were different companies in different positions. We were positioned as well as I think we could have been going into it.
But this idea that the demand for the really state-of-the-art logistics is really the future, because in a more omni-channel world, certainly in this market, a more omni-channel world, we are going to have to change the way we distribute. I mean, we saw, for example, the great success, and I hope I don't get into trouble for naming names and companies and brands and things here, but ShopRite stole a march on South Africa because it got its distribution right before everybody else did, and the rest had to play catch-up. There is a huge strategic advantage in getting your logistics absolutely right.
There is, and we're in as I say, in a position now where we get to not come off a very low base. So we're in a good position now, and then strategically look at what our footprint looks like for the next little while when this omnichannel world is here. And we need to adapt well to keep our footprint in the right areas, to manage our customer, to service our customer best. It's in our DNA. And there might be some things along the way that we need to do to strategically make sure that we're servicing that customer base. Like you said, some really good textbooks on South African companies who've done it well and done it badly. And we feel like we're in a really good position to springboard now.
Does it change the retail strategy for Cotton On? I mean, Cotton On was, one day it wasn't there. The next day it was there and it was everywhere. I mean, it was one of the most incredible retail rollouts that we'd seen in South Africa. It was speedy. There was a huge mall grab in the early days of Cotton On. Does that change in this new world?
I don't think it does. I think certainly the amount of we focus then on what we can in those retail, in the bricks and mortar stores. We're paying more attention to that because we know that there are customers going there who love that experience, who love the touch and feel. They love strolling around, seeing what's available. And then there's that segment of the population that love doing that online. So we make sure that our stores are being merchandised excellently. Our e-com site, which again has the benefit of a very experienced team because they've been doing it for a lot longer than we've had the e-com market in South Africa, being merchandised so easy to shop, and we feel that sort of melting together of different concepts and different ideas is best suited to service our customer base.
Mike Sopforth, thank you, Phil. Mike Sopforth, some people have lost a bit of signal, but I think that is the nature, I'm afraid, of this new world of ours. Mike Sopforth, I mean, all the stuff that was meant to happen by 2030 happened between March and June, and it kind of feels as if we've been watching a movie Charlie Chaplin style on fast forward at 15 frames a second rather than 25, and everything has moved hell of quickly. What's your reading of this world that we're in?
Yeah, Bruce, I love the way you've put that. And I want to echo what Steve said around we should never underestimate people's ability to go back to old habits. I think sometimes we overestimate the impact of change in the short term, but underestimate it in the long term. And I think we've been offered a gift, actually. We not wanting to diminish the human tragedy of the situation, but in a way, we've been offered a time machine into what our world could look like in 10 years' time. And what that does do is eradicate any excuses for not putting into, even if you weren't able to capitalize now, even if you weren't able to adapt now, even if this was from an organizational perspective, a fundamentally traumatic event, there is simply no excuse to not be prepared for what we've now learned, to not integrate those lessons into the fundamentals of our business. And I think our receptiveness to that has got a lot to do with the kind of DNA of our leadership is, how prepared are we to let go of things that we've assumed to be true about the past, and how prepared are we to let go of legacy, kind of the way we've always done things, thinking, a good friend of mine speaks about innovation being letting go of old things rather than trying to do new things. And, in many ways, I think what we've realized organizations are doing is whether it's about redesigning their real world or bricks or mortar experience, or repurposing their e-commerce strategy, or accelerating it, everybody's just trying to minimize making their complexity the customer's problem. That's really what we're trying to do is just simplify, get back to the basics, and the truth is we've had examples of how effectively this can be done long before we arrived in this circumstance. Brands like Costco, which for all intents and purposes should really struggle up against the likes of Amazon in an industry and in a geography where, I mean, you'd be loony to go up against Amazon in this time, have shown that sticking to the basics can be a really powerful way to maintain a competitive advantage and continue to do well. So I want to be careful that we don't overestimate, but also there's no excuses left not to adapt.
I mean, we're so keen to get back to our bad habits. We want to go out. I don't smoke, but I want to smoke a cigarette. I want to go to a shop. I want to buy a box of cigarettes, and I want to light one just because I'll be allowed to. I'm exaggerating, of course. But we want to go back to some of our bad habits, and we want to revert to some of our bad habits. Possibly the best case scenario that we get out of COVID-19 from the opportunity it presents to change is that we take all of the best lessons that we've learned over the last 6-7 months, and we can then apply those. So maybe we've been fast forwarded to 2030, and by the time things settle down, we're in what would have been 2025. I don't know.
Yeah, so I think it's less, and I know you were joking, it's less probably about a bad habit thing and more just a comfort thing, just what I'm familiar with and what I know. However, being uncomfortable over the last period has also taught me about a whole lot of things that I had underestimated. I mean, despite my digital orientation, I don't do as much online shopping as I probably should. So I've discovered a new way to interact with brands and organizations I might not have before. But through that process, through those channels, I've also been alerted to real world experiences that I wouldn't have been exposed to, or retailers that weren't on my radar or weren't part of my shopping experience before. So there's this more of an interplay than a kind of thinking of these things in terms of polar opposites, or, it's real world or e-commerce. And what we're really thinking about is how do we reinvent the value proposition for shoppers, and then fit the appropriate channel to that, rather than going, we need an e-commerce solution and then trying to retrofit that into legacy business models. I think that's exciting. That's really cool stuff. And it's the brands that are thinking about it that way that I think are, and that's got nothing to do with whether they're new and funky or old and established. That's irrelevant. It's your receptiveness to the opportunity. It's your capacity for adaptability that's really interesting.
Okay, Mike, thank you very much. I mean, this time has whizzed past really quickly, and it's actually time to wrap up. Robert, just wrap up for me, please, from your perspective as to how you see the world of logistics, real estate, changing in the next 5 years. Give me your perspective, the European perspective.
Yes, I mean, clearly, looks like European logistics would reshape completely within the next 5 years in terms of locations, in terms of where you build and what you build. Clearly, I mean, e-commerce is going to be growing and growing, and it's going to be a larger and larger portion of what logistic developers or logistic world is doing. But also what you would have is there would have to kind of be a push capital-wise to really understand the asset class. I mean, this asset class is quite small in terms of volume comparing to the other asset classes, and it's growing quite fast. So the know-how would have to come also at the same time with the demand and the push into the sector. So there will be a lot of moving pieces within the 5-year period. Definitely huge growth ahead of us and big reshape, and borders would count less. And you have to then look through the borders, also debt and equity side, and you have to follow the demand. So we would be probably trying to pioneer in some locations, trying to kind of follow the customers like Amazon, and we would be pushing our capital to follow us because this is where the demand would be. So I think there will be a lot of, the layout of logistics in Europe would change dramatically.
Thank you, Robert. Stephen Brown, I mean, the free trade deal for Africa has been kind of put on hold a little bit, and perhaps that's an opportunity set 10, 15 years from now. Do you have the same sort of level of optimism for South Africa as to the business opportunity that presents itself as Robert does for Europe?
I certainly do, Bruce. I think, you know, we're still very bullish on South Africa, and especially the logistics opportunity. You know, we sometimes forget that it's still a 5 trillion rand economy. You know, we think when we see -8 or 10% GDP growth, that means we're getting nothing. You know, there's still a big economy. And I think the one thing that we do have in our favor, a little bit similar to Poland and Eastern Europe, is that, you know, for logistics and for logistics real estate, if you can be a bit of a portal and you can sort of leapfrog, you know, just the domestic market, I think you can then really have an asset class that is far bigger than the country in which it's present. So I think that's something that we've certainly seen in the likes of Poland and Eastern and Central Europe. And I think that's an opportunity for us if, you know, our neighbors can get it together and the gas pipeline in Mozambique can become profitable. I think we can use the infrastructure that we still have in South Africa to really grow all of our logistics, and all of the companies that are allied to that are going to benefit.
Thank you, Stephen Brown. Phil Murray, what do you need from this industry? What do you need from these guys to make it work better?
Well, I hope there's lots of customers listening, right? And that's, I think, our key. So our customers need to be kept happy, and we need to carry on evolving, no excuses. We've got to execute to our customers' expectation. What that expectation lands at in next month or next year, you know, we'll be there. And that, I think, is key to our growth, which we are bullish about. And we are keen to be part of that good story.
Mike, let's give you the final word on this particular segment. I mean, at one point, the temptation to go to the supermarket, buy a pack of razor blades and run a nice warm bath was looking preferable to many of the other choices that we had at our disposal. It feels like hopefully we're getting over the worst of the health crisis. What comes next is the consequence of the political response and the lockdowns, and that is an economy in trouble. Can we help rebuild this economy by being smarter in things like e-commerce and omni-channel retail, and really transforming the way quite an antiquated system has been working in South Africa for some time?
Sure, Bruce. I mean, that is the $1 million question. Well, that's the 5 trillion rand question. And I like the rest of the panel, remain bullish. I mean, this has been a big wake-up call for many of us. I think there's two things that are happening that are really interesting. Number one is there's a bit of a political awakening among South Africans in general, and the last of the apathetic lot has changed their focus towards realizing that the only way we're going to move forward really is active citizenship, and I'm excited to see what that produces and what the relationship between that and economic growth will be. But I think from an economic, we're nothing if not resilient, and we have certainly, and I know you'll be speaking about that, we have certainly seen difficult and unimaginably challenging times in our recent history. And there's just something about this place that makes us bounce back and bounce back hard. And I hope, somebody said to me or reminded me the other day, it is never ever as bad as we think it's going to be, but it's also never as good as we think it's going to be. And I hope that to continue to be true, that somewhere in the middle, we can make sense and reason and bounce back really well as a team, because nobody else is going to do it for us, right? We've realized that we can't necessarily rely on our politicians and institutions. It's going to be us. It's going to be you and me.
And the biggest understatement of the day so far. We can't necessarily rely on our politicians. Mike Southall, thank you very much. Robert Dabrowski, thank you very much. Stephen Brown, thank you. Phil Moran, thank you. In a moment, a perspective that has been teed up so nicely by our panelists today. That's coming up now.